Georgia has more than a few small towns that were once so prosperous people assumed they'd last forever until fate and nature pulled them down into a quieter kind of oblivion. But did you know one of them wasn't just swallowed in spirit? It was swallowed for real, underwater, and every year as the water shifts, pieces of it rise again like a strange ritual of history. Sound creepy yet? That's still not the main course tonight. Because there's another town whose very name is tied to something horrific people say was uncovered when ancient burial ground erosion revealed what should have stayed hidden. Welcome to Top 10 Creepiest Small Towns in Georgia, a list that might make you look at familiar backroads with an entirely different set of eyes. Now let's begin. Number 10. Abercorn. Abercorn is a town that got erased so cleanly you could drive past it 100 times and never know you're rolling over a missing chapter of early Georgia. Abercorn was one of those first-wave colonial villages near Savannah River Country, a place that looked like a good idea on paper. Water nearby, a gateway into the interior, the kind of spot you'd expect to grow into a steady little river town with a church, docks, families, and stubborn hope. The records tell us it was established very early in the colony's life, and for a brief moment it had that fragile promise that every frontier settlement carries. Then the ground turned against the dream. Georgia Historical Society notes the location proved unsuitable for permanent settlement, and Abercorn ended up categorized among the dead towns of the state. That single phrase is polite, but it is terrifying if you let it sink in. Unsuitable can mean disease pressure. It can mean floods, mosquitoes, swampy soil, isolation, or supply lines that never truly stabilized. It can mean a place that quietly teaches people to leave before it breaks them. Whatever the exact mix was, the result is the same. The village fizzled out so early that history barely had time to take a proper photograph of it. That is why Abercorn is creepy in a way that feels almost modern. You know the feeling when a store closes overnight and by morning the sign is gone, the shelves are empty, and the parking lot looks like it never existed. Abercorn is that feeling, but stretched across centuries. Sources about Lost Georgia note that after the settlement failed, the land shifted into plantation use, and today there is no clear-built townscape left for you to point at and say, there it was. You're left with a name lingering in the landscape, including Abercorn Creek, and the uneasy suggestion that an entire community can vanish without leaving you a dramatic ruin to mourn. So if you ever want real creepiness, not Hollywood fog, imagine this: a place that failed so completely it became invisible. No haunted house tour, no crumbling Main Street, just quiet river country and the knowledge that people once tried to build a life here, realized the earth would not cooperate, and walked away. That kind of silence is not empty, it's loaded. Number 9. Petersburg. You want creepiness that feels real, not costume store spooky. Petersburg gives you that cold, slow shiver kind of history. This place was not some tiny blink and you miss it crossroads. It was a serious river town founded in 1786 at the meeting point of the Broad and Savannah rivers, a trading hub tied to the tobacco economy, a place that for a time ranked among the most important commercial centers in Georgia outside of the big names. When people say it was once one of the larger towns in the state, that is not hype. That is the kind of past that makes the present absence feel like a missing tooth. Now here is the twist that turns history into a ghost story you can actually stand on top of. Petersburg did not just decline, it was swallowed. The creation of Clark's Hill Reservoir, now commonly associated with J. Strom Thurmond Lake, put much of old Petersburg underwater. A city that once had streets, homes, businesses, and all the noisy human pride that comes with them is now a memory sealed beneath a man-made lake managed by the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. You cannot tour its main street, you cannot buy a postcard that shows the full skyline, you mostly float over it, and that is where the creepiness gets personal. When water levels drop, you can sometimes see remnants of the old town surface again, the outlines of foundations, old walls, pieces of the built world poking out like a drowned map trying to breathe. People describe it as a ghost town that rises to say hello and then gets pulled back under. That image is powerful because it turns a normal day at the lake into a quiet bargain with history. You came for fishing, for a cheap afternoon, maybe for peace. Instead, you are hovering over an erased community. It is like eating dinner in your living room and realizing you are sitting on top of an old theater that burned down decades ago. You do not have to believe in spirits to feel the weight of that. Number 8. Frederica. Frederica is a postcard that smiles in daylight and quietly keeps a knife in its pocket after dark. If you like places that look harmless until the light drops, this one is going to sit in your head for a while. On the map, it looks harmless. A quiet corner on St. Simon's Island, a bit of old brick, a stretch of marsh, a National Park Service sign that makes everything feel official and safe. You walk in, and it feels like any other calm, historic site. Trees, water, birds that do not care about your problems. It takes a minute before you notice how many lives were pushed through this tiny doorway of land. Back in the 18th century, this was not some sleepy little chapel by the water. This was a military town built for a border that felt very real. Britain on one side, Spain on the other, and Frederica right there as the shield for the young colony of Georgia. Imagine soldiers crammed into barracks, streets packed with houses, families trying to pretend this was normal life while warships watched the horizon. For a while it worked. Battles were fought, control was decided, and the town had purpose. That is the part the history books like. Then the purpose went away. Once the threat from Spain faded, Frederica turned from crucial to extra. Troops left. Trade dried up. People drifted off toward new chances, and the town began to rot slowly in the salt air. Stones that once talked with boots and wagons started talking with crabs and grass. That is the first layer of the creep factor. You are walking along straight little colonial streets that used to carry fear and hope, and now they lead to nothing at all. Just the river breathing in and out. But the part that really gets under your skin sits just up the road at Christ Church and its old cemetery. If you talk to locals, they will tell you this place has stories. Lights where there should not be lights. Footsteps when you are the only one locked in with the moss and the marble. Old legends about restless figures among the graves, about the past refusing to stay politely in the past. It is not a tourist-haunted house with a guy in a rubber mask. It is a churchyard where people still bury their dead, right next to stones so worn you can barely read the names. So picture this. You visit on a bright Georgia afternoon, kids running around, park rangers doing their routine speeches. Everything feels safe and educational. Then you imagine the same paths at 2 in the morning, no one around, tide pushing dark water against the marsh. On one side, the ruins of a military town that lost its reason to exist. On the other side, a cemetery that refuses to let its stories go. You can laugh at ghost shows all you want, but if you stand there long enough with the wind in the trees, you will feel that little voice in your head ask the old question: who is really visiting whom? Number 7. Hardwicke. Hardwicke is the kind of almost capital that ended up as a historical footnote with a pulse you can barely find. You drive through coastal Bryan County and you might expect a sleepy old river town with a stubborn little main street. Instead, you get something stranger. A place that once had big colonial ambition and now mostly survives as an idea, a marker, and the eerie gap where a town insisted it should have been. The story starts with a bold plan. The town was laid out in 1754 and was first called Georgetown, then renamed Hardwicke in 1755 by Georgia's first royal governor, John Reynolds, honoring the Earl of Hardwicke. The dream was a deep water port on the Ogeechee, a strategic coastal node that could compete with the established markets like Savannah and Sunbury. History, being history, did not sign the contract. The port never truly happened, and attention flowed elsewhere. Georgia Historical Society was one. Still, Hardwicke got its brief moment of political gravity. When Bryan County was created in 1793, Hardwicke became the county site. 4 years later, in 1797, the county site was moved to Crossroads near modern Richmond Hill. That is the kind of administrative gut punch a young town rarely survives. The marker record is blunt about the aftermath. By 1824, one man, Alexander Netherclift, is listed as the sole resident. In 1866, there was an attempt to revive Hardwicke, but it failed. The marker even teases the tragic alternate universe by noting this was a town that might have become one of Georgia's capitals. Instead, it joined the dead towns. Georgia Historical Society +1. That is the positive and the creepy braided together in one tight knot. The positive is that Hardwicke was not a random swamp mistake. It was deliberate colonial urban planning with a strategic river vision. The creepy is that the vision evaporated so thoroughly that modern visitors are left with almost no physical town to mourn. You are not walking down a ruined commercial block. You are standing in the shadow of a plan that never got to become a memory. Hardwicke is not scary because you see abandoned houses. It is scary because you do not. The silence is the landmark. The emptiness is the artifact. And if a place can lose its future that fast, you cannot help wondering what other confident little towns are quietly one bad decision away from becoming nothing but a sign on the side of the road. Number 6. Jacksonboro. Jacksonboro is a town that feels like it got fired by history and then sued by a ghost. You do not come here for a grand ruin or a dramatic skyline of broken brick. You come for something creepier, the proof of absence. The feeling that a whole community can be erased so thoroughly that the silence starts to sound like a message. Back in the early days of Screven County, Jacksonboro was the county seat, a working frontier hub on the road between the coast and the interior. It had the kind of everyday importance that does not look glamorous in a textbook, but matters to real lives. Court days, trade, gossip, families building routines around the assumption that the town would keep being there tomorrow. Then the story takes its signature Southern Gothic turn. The most famous local legend says the traveling preacher Lorenzo Dow was treated badly by townspeople. As the tale goes, he left, stood on a bridge, shook the dust from his feet, and cursed Jacksonboro, declaring the town would be destroyed and only one house would be spared. Whether you take that literally or as a cultural memory, the aftermath lines up with the mood. The county seat was moved away, the town lost its political oxygen, and what remained shrank into legend and leftover ground. Historical markers and ghost town records describe Jacksonboro as a dead town now with little remaining beyond the famous Goodall House and scattered cemeteries. That is why this place hits harder than a simple abandoned main street. It is the idea of punishment without a courtroom, the kind of folklore that turns civic decline into a moral story you can repeat on a porch. You can almost hear the logic of it. A town is rude to the wrong man, history nods, and the map grows a blank spot. It is unfair, dramatic, and deeply human, which is exactly why it survives. Jacksonboro is where you learn that sometimes the most unsettling town is not the one that looks dead. It is the one that looks like it was never allowed to leave a body behind. Number 5. Sunbury is a port that went from loud to ghost quiet, like a jukebox that swallowed its own coin and never played again. You are not looking at a random forgotten hamlet here. You are looking at a place that once had enough confidence to imagine it could stand shoulder to shoulder with Savannah. Sunbury was founded in 1758 on the Medway River, and for a stretch of colonial life it functioned as a real coastal gateway for Georgia trade. It was busy enough that historians and local records often describe it as one of the most important ports in the colony after Savannah. If you put yourself in the shoes of someone living there in the late 1700s, you can almost hear the daily noise. Boats, warehouses, merchants, the gossip of a town that thinks the future is guaranteed. You would have had Fort Morris nearby as a hard reminder that prosperity on the Georgia coast was never just about money. It was about survival and power. The fort and the town became part of the Revolutionary era drama, with the British taking the fort, the area absorbing the scars, and the residents learning that a port is a tempting target when empires are angry. Then the mood shifts. Hard. Sunbury did not just fade like an old business district losing foot traffic, it unraveled under a pile of pressures that coastal communities know too well. Disease fears, changing trade patterns, and the post-war economic reshuffling all helped bleed the town. By the 1800s, the port energy was gone, and what remained started to feel more like an echo than a place. Modern accounts of Georgia ghost towns describe Sunbury as a dead or near-dead town whose physical remnants are limited, with the emotional weight now carried by old cemeteries and the quiet coastal landscape. That is the real creepiness you can sell to the viewer. You can tell them to imagine the bargain a town like this makes with the sea. You get beauty and commerce. You also get the kind of silence that can arrive without warning. One generation is building docks. The next is visiting family graves. The next is not visiting at all. The colonial-era cemetery at Sunbury and the broader Liberty County graveyard lore amplify that sensation. You are surrounded by stones and moss that do not need a ghost to feel haunted. Time is doing the job just fine, a place that looks gentle but carries the memory of being important and then being abandoned. You keep asking the viewer the same quiet question. If a town this confident could go this quiet, what does that say about the rest of the coast? You drive past without thinking twice. Number 4. Wrightsboro. A lullaby town that sounds sweet until you realize the melody is being played on a graveyard piano with half the keys missing. You come here expecting a quiet historical stop, maybe a polite little story about faith and farming, but what you actually get is a place where kindness tried to grow in hard soil, and the century basically said no. This settlement was founded in 1768 and is remembered as one of the southernmost Quaker communities in early America, tied to old colonial roots like the Quaker Road that once linked this interior pocket to Savannah. Big moral intention, small frontier reality. So what is the good part? The good part is real. You are standing near the footprint of people who tried to build a life around restraint, community, and peace, and you can still point to tangible leftovers like the Ansley House, a stone structure from around 1785 that is often cited among the oldest surviving pieces connected to the settlement. Old stone, old names, old hopes. You can feel it. Now the shift. Because creepiness here is not a jump scare. It is a slow burn. Why did Wrightsboro fade when the values were so solid? Because history does not always reward good manners. Accounts of the settlement describe growing frontier pressure and political stress around the American Revolution, a tough environment for a pacifist community trying to stay itself while the wider world demanded conflict. People left, the town loosened, the map started forgetting. Do you need a horror prop to make that unsettling? No. You just need the idea that you can do everything right and still lose your place in the story. That thought sticks. Then you add the modern layer, the kind locals trade in with a half smile and a lowered voice. The nearby rock house and its surroundings have drawn paranormal investigations and reports of shadowy figures and unexplained voices, which gives Wrightsboro a contemporary ghost narrative wrapped around its older Quaker silence. You might roll your eyes. Then you might stop talking when the trees get too quiet. Number 3. Ebenezer. Ebenezer feels like a prayer that got interrupted mid-sentence, then left open on the pew for 300 years. You drive out near the Savannah River and you expect a tidy little colonial story with polished moral lessons. But what you actually find is a ghost town built from faith, survival, and a few historical scars that never stopped stinging. This community was founded in 1734 by the Salzburgers, German-speaking Protestant refugees who arrived with the kind of discipline that makes a frontier look civilized, at least on a good day. They first settled closer to Ebenezer Creek, then moved in 1736 toward better land near the river, building a new Ebenezer that briefly thrived. So what made it special at its best? A lot, honestly. The settlers developed early industry, including silk efforts and mills, and their community life was intense in the good way, with institutions like early schooling and care for children woven into the identity of the place. The crown jewel still standing is Jerusalem Lutheran Church, established with the congregation in 1733 and built in brick between 1767 and 1769. Widely described as the oldest continuously worshiping Lutheran congregation in America in its original building. You can see why people still treat the site with respect. It is not just old, it is stubbornly alive. Now ask the darker question, why does it feel so haunted? Because the story keeps stepping on its own heart. Ebenezer was battered by Revolutionary-era turmoil and later lost political gravity when local power moved elsewhere and the settlement gradually emptied out. The townsite and church were eventually recognized on the National Register of Historic Places in 1974, which is a formal way of admitting a place can be historically priceless and socially abandoned at the same time. Then comes the moment that changes the air. The Ebenezer Creek tragedy during Sherman's March to the Sea in December 1864, when Union General Jefferson C. Davis removed the pontoon bridge and many freed people following the Army were left behind, with hundreds drowning in the swollen waters, became a lasting wound in Georgia's memory. That is not folklore, that is history with teeth. So when locals talk about the creek with lowered voices, do you blame them? No. Is it a ghost story or a grief story? The honest answer is both. Ebenezer is creepy because the silence is earned and the beauty is complicated, and the church still stands there like a lighthouse built for souls instead of ships. You walk in calm, you leave quieter. Number 2. Auraria. Auraria is what happens when a gold town hits retirement at 30 and still insists it is fine, like an old boxer smiling while the lights quietly turn off. You hear the name and you can almost taste the optimism of early North Georgia, because this place was born in the 1832 gold lottery frenzy and briefly lived like it had a guaranteed future. Auraria was a real boom-era community with businesses, law offices, stores, taverns, and the kind of everyday noise that makes a young town believe it is permanent. For a short stretch, it even carried the weight of local power before Dahlonega stole the spotlight and the county seat, Energy, moved on. Here is the positive truth you should let viewers feel first. Auraria was not a random backwoods myth. It was one of the early engines of the Georgia Gold Rush, a place that helped shape migration, commerce, and the identity of the region. The rivers and ridges around Lumpkin County turned into a magnet for ambition, and Auraria served as a launch pad for people who later chased new strikes across the continent. That ripple effect is part of its cultural value because the story of American movement west is also a story of small eastern towns that burned hot and then went quiet. Now, the honest creepiness. Auraria did not die with a dramatic collapse. It faded the way a party fades when the music stops and nobody wants to admit they should go home. Gold attention shifted, political gravity shifted. The town thinned out until it became an unincorporated whisper with a few historical leftovers and a lot of empty space where certainty used to live. Modern descriptions of Auraria frame it as a ghost town or near ghost town, and that label matters because it captures the emotional reality better than a census number ever could. This region was Cherokee homeland before the rush, and the speed of the scramble for wealth carries a moral shadow that never fully lifts. That shadow is the quiet ingredient that makes Auraria feel uneasy at dusk. You are not just looking at a town that lost money. You are looking at a place that briefly believed it could rewrite destiny, only to be reminded that destiny in Georgia often writes back. Number 1. Scull Shoals. Scull Shoals is a town that got ghosted by the river like a hard-working mill worker left on red by nature and still clocking in out of habit. If you want creepiness with real bones under it, you are in the right place. You are not walking into a fake, haunted attraction. You are walking into an industrial dream that the Oconee River slowly dismantled, then covered with forest like it was trying to wipe its fingerprints off the map. Scull Shoals began as an early settlement along the Oconee and grew into one of Georgia's first serious industrial communities, with mills and a paper operation that sources often cite as among the earliest in the state, later followed by a major textile presence that pulled in hundreds of workers. This was not a minor outpost. This was a place that once believed water meant permanence. It had families, wages, routines, and that stubborn small-town pride that says we will still be here next year. You can still feel that confidence in the bones of the ruins. So why does it feel so wrong now? Because the same river that powered the town also became part of what killed it. Historical accounts of the site point to repeated flooding, including a major event in the late 1800s, along with environmental changes tied to upstream land use that altered the river system and undercut the town's industrial lifeline. The factories failed, the population scattered, time did the rest, and the forest moved in like a quiet replacement crew. Then you get the detail that makes the name itself feel like a dare. The area also has indigenous archaeological significance, and the place name is often linked to accounts of eroded burial areas revealing skulls, a grim origin story that turns a normal map label into something you do not say casually at night. You do not have to overplay it, you just have to let the viewer sit with the fact that this ground carries 2 layers of vanished worlds. Today, the remains sit within Oconee National Forest under U.S. Forest Service management, with trails and interpretive context, plus the nearby experimental forest designation that frames the site as both heritage and landscape science. You can visit, you can learn, you can also feel that strange hush that only abandoned industry creates. Brick walls rising out of green silence, the river nearby like an old boss who will not apologize, and you standing there realizing the creepiest towns are not always destroyed by one dramatic moment. Sometimes they are patiently unmade. You just traveled through 10 corners of Georgia where history did not simply fade, it left fingerprints. Some of these towns were swallowed by water, some were starved by politics, some were haunted by memory, and a few were kept alive by folklore that feels emotionally true even when you doubt the details. The creepiest part is not that a place can die. The creepiest part is how quietly it can disappear while the rest of the state keeps driving, shopping, and pretending nothing was lost. If you have ever stumbled on a forgotten cemetery, an empty foundation in the woods, or a road that feels colder than it should, you already understand this mood. Tell me which town hit you hardest and why. And if you want a part 2 with more lost places, more local legends, and more real history hiding in plain sight, hit like, subscribe, and share this with someone who loves a good chill that comes with receipts.